kicking off this series of videos on photography refresher exercises, and keeping in mind that this series is for folks who are either new to photography or you just don't practice your photography all that often, and you're looking for some ideas to just kind of get you going again, get your mind thinking, get your head ready to go out on a vacation or get on a photography project and make some good photos. So this topic is all about what actually is a good photo. So I'm going to go through a handful of my own shots here and explain to you why they suck or why I think they're a strong photo. And this is based on a grading scale, mostly that you would see from judges if they were judging a photography competition. Not that you're entering your photos in a photography competition, but it helps to understand why is a photo either poor or why is it strong. So I want to start here, actually, give you a handful of examples of making a photograph. And you'll hear photographers say this a lot. We don't take photos, we make photos. There's some truth to that. Taking the photo just implies that you're kind of pulling up your camera, letting the camera pick all of the settings, and you're just sort of shooting whatever is in front of you. You're not really contemplating the scene too much. You come across a scene that looks interesting or unique. There's something that's special to you standing there in the moment. So you take out your camera and you take a shot. And then the next step past that would be thinking about, how do I actually make a stronger photo from this scene? Because you as the observer, you're standing there, you can smell the place, you can feel it, you can hear the noises around you. It has a unique quality to you because you're there, but to a stranger looking at the photo, this particular image that I've got up here now, there's nothing strong about this. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of busyness. I don't know what you really want me to look at. I would just move on past this real quickly. So taking that to the next step, then you keep walking around the scene, trying to find some interesting angles, trying to find some leading lines, some reflections in this case, try to find some depth in the photo, something that will lend people's eye to kind of keep going through the photo from the foreground all the way to the background. So I kept walking around here, took this next frame, I thought, there's still something interesting there, but there's a lot going on and I want to remove some distractions. So another principle of photography is an art of subtraction. So if you're a painter, you keep adding brush strokes, adding information to your canvas until you tell the story that you want to tell. You take people through that narrative by continually adding information until you stand back from the canvas and you say, okay, it's done. I don't need to add any more brush strokes. This tells my story. With photography, there's too much information here. It's overwhelming. As a photographer, I want to direct your eye. I want to tell you where I want you to look. What about this scene do I really want you to pay attention to? So we keep going. Okay, now I'm zoomed in on the boats. That's what really caught my eye in the first place. And I like the reflection of the boats here in the water. Okay, this is a mildly competent image. Now I'm starting to get a little bit more detail from the scene. Why did you take this photo in the first place? Why did you think this was interesting to show me? And then this is the next step, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in my photo editing video. I don't think this is a good photo edit. It's okay. So the benefit of learning to edit your photos is understanding when you're there in the scene taking the photo, what can you do with the lights and darks, the textures, the shadows, and bring out like this up here, the detail in the clouds. I can freeze the motion of the birds flying over. I can get the nice reflections in the water down here. So I took this just the next step with my editing, and I made this, which I feel is a very strong image. And I warmed it up quite a bit because I felt like the cold nature of that previous image just was not very inviting. So that is the progression of taking a photograph. When you start here, just gathering the scene that's in front of your sensor, in front of your eyes, and then we take people on that journey from just taking a photograph to making a photograph and thinking critically about what's in front of me, how do I want to present this info, what will make the strongest frame here that people will stop and go, wow, that's interesting. That's really cool. I would love to go somewhere like that. Or I would love to print that and hang that on my wall. What I'm going to do next is take you through a series of photos here from weakest to strongest based on, again, that judging scale. So we're going to start here on the low end. Nobody's arguing that these are bad photos. They are bad photos. So let's start here, though, for example, an explanation. These are all my own photos, and I'm specifically showing you some frames here from my first trip that I took through China before I really started thinking about practicing my photography in a purposeful way. So these are snapshots. I was taking these with either a phone camera or a little point and shoot pocket camera that I had with me. And I was just trying to document what I was seeing, where I was. I wasn't thinking yet about making good photos. This image in particular, there's nothing good about it. I can tell that I pulled the camera up probably to take a picture of those balloons there in the background or the busyness here in the square. Not a really good camera, so it's really dark and grainy. There could be some interesting elements here. If I were to take this shot today in this same spot, I might do some interesting things with it. But as it is, this is a poorly executed photo. It's just a throwaway frame. This is a throwaway photo. There's nothing specifically in this photo that you that you want me to look at. Are you taking a picture of the tree? Are you taking a picture of the bike cart in the background, of the garden, of the people? There's so many different points of interest here. Any of those could be interesting, but just, why did you take this photo? Now here is at least a competently executed photo. This is a mechanically proper photo. And there's a difference between a good photo that people want to stop and look at and a good photo mechanically. Mechanically, this is fine. It's sharp and nothing is blurry up here. The camera wasn't shaking. I can see the storefront. I can see the people down here. I can see inside of the store. So mechanically, there are no blown out highlights. The shadows are high enough that I can see the detail back there in the store. But what's the subject here? What story are you trying to tell me or get me to look at? Again, this is a documentary street type of photo. I was here is basically all this is telling me. Here I can start to tell there was something that I was intending to take a picture of, intending to show. And in this one, what I can think of is showing the difference between the old architecture here of the Jade Temple against one of these skyscrapers in the background. And yep, that could be interesting. That's a story that I hadn't seen before I got to a city like this. But my framing is terrible because I've got a light pole here and I've got power lines running across it. Just, not thinking about what's actually in the frame. So what I was saying about photography is an art of subtraction. What could I remove from this scene to remove the distraction from my subjects, which would be this temple and the building in the background? And today I could do that because I have lenses that will let me get up a little bit closer and photograph up at this and get the whole story in. So I could today, take a better lens and move myself into position to photograph this better. Sometimes, you're limited by the equipment that you have on you. If you're just shooting with a point and shoot or with your phone, you don't have that option of different lenses and different perspectives. Next frame. This one is a mildly competent image. There's a story here. There's something that's kind of interesting. There's a lifestyle here that I hadn't seen before I went to this part of the world. So I was just walking around, taking some random photos. I stopped and thought, I've never seen anything quite like this. Now, today that I've traveled a lot, this isn't an interesting scene to me. I wouldn't even stop and think twice about this. But at the time, I pulled my camera up because I was documenting. Again, just kind of remembering, hey, I was here and this is something unique and interesting that I saw. But, there's just too much going on here. You could tell this story in an interesting way. This might make an interesting street frame if it was executed a little bit differently. I don't want to get too much into that philosophy on this video. That's for some of our later videos in the series. But here, not well executed. I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to get from this photo. And what I want you to think about here, I've kind of been touching on already, is thinking about what's the subject in the frame. How do I make that the most impactful thing? So when I took this photo, I was probably trying to focus on this altar here in the center of the Jade Temple, but I didn't think about all of this other noise of the people standing down here, the smoke that's coming up from all of their incense and hazing up the sky over here. I could have put something a little bit different in the background, and that's something to think about too when you're composing. Could I have moved a little bit and placed this altar against something that was a little less busy rather than these busy walls back here with all the red ribbons? I mean, I don't hate it like it is, but it's not a strong photo. It tells me, again, I was here, I was documenting something, but I could have walked up closer and taken a picture of this altar against a little bit cleaner background, either against the sky or something that was dark and not as busy in the background. This is a train station in Shanghai, I think. And this is a mildly competent photo. Again, mechanically executed okay. It's not blurry, but again, it's something that's kind of interesting to you there in the moment. This is definitely a hard scene to make a good photo of because it's so vast, so expansive. How do you tell the story of what you're looking at here? I would probably at least crop out this pillar here in the front now and make sure that I was focusing more on the terminal down here, just the amount of seats and the amount of busyness and all of the gates leading to the different trains. That's really what's interesting to me in this scene, not just stopping and taking a snapshot to show the vast size and immensity of it, which is what I was feeling when I pulled up my camera and took this shot. Here again, some interesting compositional elements, but not well executed because the camera's shaking, it's blurry. Compositionally, we've got a leading line going all the way through the frame here. And then along our leading line, we've got a point of interest here. Somebody sitting on the bench. There's somebody else walking here. So your eyes want to go all the way through the frame, which is good. And then we've got a nice framing element up here with the trees, framing in our story or our narrative. So if I had executed this a little bit better and it wasn't blurry, it was sharp throughout, it might actually be an interesting photo. Okay, now we're getting into mildly competent photos where I can tell there's a point, and here I was walking along the bund. I saw this gentleman flying his kite, and he's looking up there at I can't remember what this thing is called, the tower there in Shanghai. And I didn't have a very capable camera with me, so it didn't come out real clear. But at least the composition is interesting. There's nothing wrong with this photo from that point of view. He's flying his kite. He's looking up there at the tower. Okay, there are a couple of interesting elements there. Plus, I thought this was kind of cool, just the way he was leaning back, flying his kite. He mirrored the lines here in the fence. So some interesting compositional elements there. There's nothing wrong with that, but just mechanically poorly executed. Here again, moderately competent, but could be done better. This is a little bit too bright for me. It shows the temple of heaven. I mean, again, though nothing interesting about it in particular, and there are distracting elements. So these people down here in the frame, I should have waited for them to walk out of the frame and then took the photo. This is interesting. We've got something happening down here. We've got lines leading into the temple. I like the empty space up here. Probably, again, should have shot this with a better camera so it wasn't so grainy and noisy. But some good elements here, but overall, not really a strong frame. Here again, competent photo, but not well executed. This is a wishing tree in Guilin, China, where people come and hang their red ribbons, which is basically to signify that they want success in the coming year. So they hang it on the banyan tree here. Really cool thing, something I hadn't heard of before I got there. So I stopped and just took this snapshot. Again, with a small camera, I couldn't tell that it was blurry until I got home and put it on my computer and realized, oh man, I blew it. That photo just didn't turn out very well. So the other thing that I would do today, if I were to retake this photo, is walk around over here and talk to this gal and try and get their face in the photo. Not everybody is welcoming of that, but it's something that I always try to do if there are people in the photo now. Otherwise, if you're a photo sniper and you're just taking pictures of people that are down the street to include context or a sense of scale in your photos, there's nothing wrong with that. But when there's somebody right there in the photo, I would probably try and walk around and talk to her and get her smiling face as part of the image. This one is just a step above, it's kind of on the top end of starting to be competent. There are not distracting elements here. I probably now might go clone this stuff out because there's a little bit of busyness happening down here, but you immediately know the story. This is a monk standing in an altar doing some sort of a ritual or preparing for a ritual. I like this balancing element up here. Now I would probably frame this a little differently, try and make sure that was directly over him just for some symmetry to the frame, but there's nothing wrong with this. I like the framing out here on the outside. It frames the story nicely. Probably too, if I'd captured this with a little better camera, he would be a little bit cleaner and I would be able to create some separation, just depth of field where he would be in focus. And then these pillars out here would be a little bit blurry or out of focus, which is probably what I would try to do now with this type of frame. This is a competent image. Nothing wrong with this. It's exposed well. Everything is sharp that should be. There's nothing blurry. There's nothing distracting. You can tell what I want you to look at. The main subject is right there in the center of the frame. I don't necessarily like that the wall goes out of the frame there, but it doesn't hurt anything. But it's competent. It's a solid image, but there's nothing terribly interesting about it. It's just kind of, okay, whatever. That's the Great Wall of China. Whoop-de-frickin' do. This one, competent image. But now we're getting into the area of some people would like it and some people wouldn't. a lot of people would look at this and say, well, that's crap. Why would you do this to a photo? So this was not a strong image at all to begin with, mostly because I cropped out something that was down here. There was something on the shoreline that I didn't want in this frame, which is why I turned my lens up and got more of the clouds there. But then when I was playing around with this, editing it, I flipped it over to black and white, and I thought, wow, that creates a little bit more depth. Interesting. There's some layering. I've got a layer of clouds down here out in the distance, and then I've got clouds up here in the foreground, and then I've also got the trees down here. So I've got some different elements to kind of draw your eye around the frame and make you think, what's going on here? What's the perspective? So I felt like this was at least a competent image, not really a strong image, but this is one of the first frames that I took and printed where I felt like, what, I've got something going on here that's interesting. I'm going to kind of keep working this direction and learning to do this both in terms of compositional elements, layering them, and then editing my photos, just learning what I can do with an image after I take it. This one is a step above competent. This is a 6 or a 7 on the scale. And, again, there are a few problems with this photo taken, I think, with a cell phone at the time. But the reason that this is a step above competent is you know exactly what I want you to look at. That's a tower. I can tell maybe what kind of day it is. There's a lot of interesting ornate decoration on here, interesting craftsmanship that went into this tower. I like this image. This is one of those that I got from that trip in China that I remember, and I think back on it fondly because it takes me to a moment. It takes me to a feeling. And if I had backed out and I had been, 50 yards down the street and I had gotten a lot of that noise like we did, let's say on the Jade Temple earlier, where we had all of the cars and the power lines in front of it, then it would lose its impact. This is more impactful because, boom, right there, I'm taken to a moment, I'm taken to a feeling, and I don't have all those other things distracting me and drawing my interest away from the primary subject. This one, again, step above competent. There's some mechanical problems with this one. This one I was in Ghana, Africa, and I was with a medical group. I was their photographer for the trip, and we visited these African chiefs, and they had to give us their blessing to serve the villages that we were going to. And then everybody turned and left, and I was the last person standing there, and the chief says, take my photo. And all of these guys got over there next to him and sat in their chairs, and there's just these bright windows behind them, and that was the only light in the room. I would love to execute this a little bit differently now. So it's okay. It accomplished the purpose. It tells a story. It's a good production level photo. Now here I would say is a 7. This is a step above competent. You're starting to see some skill applied here. You're starting to see some purpose in the framing. There was a subject there that I wanted to photograph. She was sitting there sorting rice. This is in Cuba, sometime late afternoon. I love the way that the light was hitting her here, giving her kind of a rim light along the side of her face. And then I was in the next room, and I considered going over and sitting and talking to her, but she saw me standing there kind of contemplating taking a photo, and I couldn't speak her language, but she looked up at me and smiled, and I got this interesting frame. And I try and do that now if somebody knows they're going to be in my image, always making sure that, number one, I have their permission to take the image, and then you get some sort of a reaction. So there's a little bit of personality going on in the frame too. So there's more going on than just mechanically making a photo too. It's how you interact with the scene that you're in front of, how you pay attention to the light, how you pay attention to, like this, the framing elements that bring her into the center of the frame and center of the interest. And then properly exposing, of course, so that the rice here isn't overexposed and her face is nicely exposed. And then acting on the scene so that you get some sort of a reaction, or you get something that's a little bit more interesting than just saying, oh, that's a pretty scene. So we've got a little bit of a moment there with her. Here I would say is a level 8. This is one of those that's a very good image, not quite a best image, but very good. And the reason for that, I would say, is mostly the compositional elements. Rather than just stepping up there and taking a photo of the windmill, which is what caught my interest at first, I got down and showed a little bit of a different perspective on it. So this is something that you'll see painters do a lot, that photographers sometimes pay attention to, sometimes don't. But in painting, the element is whatever is nearest to the frame or nearest to you as the painter is going to be the largest in the frame. So I did that with the post here. That means, hey, this is the thing that's closest to me. And then the next thing that's largest in the frame is next closest. And then the smallest thing in the frame that I want to draw your attention to is the furthest away from me. And painters do that because they realize the difference between what they're doing, which is painting on a 2D canvas, and standing there in person. So when reviewing things with our eyes, of course we see it in 3D. We have that sense of depth in just in our sight, in our experience. But when you put it on a 2D plane, how do you draw people through that experience and show them that things are larger or nearer to you? And this is one solid way to do that. So another interesting element is just the lines going here through the frame, but then your eyes are going to go back to the center of the frame because there are other interesting elements over here. So these lines could lead your eye out of the frame and you could just go, oh, okay, moving on. I'm not interested anymore. But I think that there's enough interest here in the depth of field just to say, hey, there's something else out there on the horizon. I want to go back and look at that. Again, an 8. And, this is another image that you could say either is crap or it's a good image. This one is an 8, kind of bordering on a 9. This is at what I feel would be the top end of my photos. And the reason for this is the maroon bells in Colorado. You've probably seen hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of photos of this scene, of this location. So when I was there, I was trying to find something that was unique, something I hadn't seen in every other photo. So I took, 300 or 400 frames this day, but this was the one that stood out to me because as I was just kind of waiting for the light to change, I was just looking around and I saw these stones leading down into the water, kind of pointing to the mountain. I thought, wow, how do I bring that out? Now, I could not have achieved this look without doing a little bit of post-processing, bringing up the shadows, sharpening this area a little bit, and then choosing the right lens setup as well to get some good depth of field in this so that everything down here is sharp as well as up in the mountain. And then I think I layer or focus stack this as well, which is a technique, again, you don't have to know about, just one of those things you might want to practice as you get further into your photography. And this is a personal philosophy of mine. I've talked a few times in this video about editing. I do like photo editing because I think it helps us to understand how to get the most out of our images when we're capturing them in the field. Personally, I would rather be out shooting new frames, exploring with my camera than sitting in front of a computer processing images. It is part of the knowledge that I think you should learn. It has helped me, but I don't want to spend a day editing a photo when I could be out capturing new photos and practicing my compositional skills. Again, I talk about editing a lot, but don't think of that as something that you have to do. The better you get at understanding editing, which is just the components that make up your photo, all the lights and the darks, and where do you want the sharpness to be, how bright should the highlights be, that will help you make better photos when you go out in the field and capture those images too. Another strong image, you could take this either way. You could look at this and say, well, I don't know, what do the mountains have to do with the story there? Why did you leave the fence in the foreground there? Because that's a little bit blurry. And yes, I considered all of those elements as I was standing here making this image. I went and stood right up next to the fence, took a photo of just this old grain elevator, by itself, cutting out all of the other elements, even leaving out the mountains in the background, trying to get rid of the dark clouds in the sky there. But then I thought about, how am I actually going to edit this image? Because it was a flat gray day. There wasn't much going on. What got my interest is this low level of clouds was letting the light from above shine directly on the mountains. So I was thinking there is a little bit of interest here in this barn in the foreground. I want something to contrast with those bright mountains in the background. So I could have just found a scene where I was taking a photo of only the mountains and leaving out everything else. But I wanted to set the scene, set the mood, tell you where I was, tell you a little bit more of a story here. So rather than just photographing the mountains and leaving it at that, I included these foreground elements to set the scene, make you feel something, feel a sense of place, feel a sense of time even, and create a mood here also by the sepia edit, the way that I color toned it. And then of course we've got some layering with the fog that's going through the valley down here, and then our final hero, which is the mountains out there in the background. So some things you could play with this type of scene, but this is one of those moments where you look at it and you realize I've got like 15 minutes to get a good photo here before the clouds move and the light changes and the whole scene is different. So I was kind of trying to hurry, but I did make about 20 or 30 different frames here. This is the one that I felt was the strongest out of it. This one, again, a really strong image. Here's what I think this photo has going for it. I realized as I'm looking at this, I missed a few things in editing it. If you're paying attention to this right now, we've got dust spot there, some sort of weird smudge over here on the side of my sensor that I didn't catch the first time I edited this, and I've got some sort of bright element up here in the sky, maybe stars starting to peek out. So a few problems with it. But in terms of composition and the way it's executed otherwise, I feel like a very good image. We've got, again, foreground element here. Did somebody walk up the dune here? Where did they go? Those are my footprints. I put those on the dune on purpose to create an interest in the foreground there. So this is part of making the photograph rather than just taking the photograph. I had been standing here taking a few frames thinking this needs something else because there's just not, I don't know. And then I walked up the dune there to create a little bit of level of, hey, what's going on here in the foreground? And then we've got a point of interest in the foreground, midground, which is all the dunes and this nice tree, and then the background, which is the sky with the moon starting to peek out. There's another element at play here that makes this a strong image, which is the layering of lights and darks through the frame. So we start with darks down here on the bottom, and then we've got some light elements, which is the brights right here through the middle, and then we've got another darks, and then another brights, and then another darks. And that just helps your eye to kind of bounce through the frame because your eye wants to go, like we said, between the lights and the darks. So we start down here with the darks, your eyes kind of continually move through the frame, looking at the next level of interest through the image. This, again, really strong image. I think one of the top end images that I have, just for the purpose that there are no distracting elements. Everything in the scene contributes to the feeling and the moment and understanding what's going on here. Now, I've had a lot of people look at this image and say, why are those boats all sitting there? Tell me a little bit more of the story. And to me, that doesn't create confusion. That creates just the level of interest that I was going for. I want somebody to stop and think about this and say, tell me a little bit more. I want to know more of the story. So I think that is also part of a strong image. And that what I like here about the way that this works is we've got the reflections, and then we've got some dark contrasty areas here with a lot of detail. And then we've got something else going on in the sky. So we've got a foreground, a nice midground, and then a background element. And the birds flying through at just the right moment created another level of interest that I wasn't really planning on, but that just worked out nicely. Our ending point for the conversation is the Medina in Marrakesh. Now, you could argue that there's no single point of interest here. And again, a spot where I spent a little bit of time trying to pick out different interesting things that were happening in the crowd there. Like this guy standing with his bicycle, somebody at a stall over here selling something. There were different things going on down here in the foreground. And then once the sun went down and it got dark, I realized the story is everything. The story is the busyness here, that everybody comes and gathers here. People are sitting to eat. People are shopping. People are out just exploring and enjoying the evening. There are people down here in a hurry going back and forth. The scene, the story, the sense that I want you to feel is everything. The busyness and the sense of just, if you're in this place, that you would feel all this motion and excitement and feel people moving around. So that was the mood that I wanted to accomplish, more so than just showing you a single element of this scene. So I had to do that by a few little editing tricks, kind of drawing down the lights here because I did have to do a long exposure. But then I thought that worked out nicely because we do see some people moving around here as well as some people just standing, hanging out, kind of chilling, taking in the scene. So it's got a few elements of everything there. So that's why I think this one is a successful image. So I hope this has been useful for you in terms of getting you to think about, all of everything from the point of starting to take in a scene, starting to think about, what's in front of me. How do I turn this into a strong photograph, to, taking in those next elements, pulling up your camera, taking a few frames, seeing what you get, and then arriving at something that you feel like, you really got the essence of that scene, and you've arrived at a photo that you can show to people and it'll make them stop and think and want to know more about it.